So I hope you still have a little bit of energy to pay attention to this talk. So the speaker is David Lopez Perez. So David is Spanish. He studied in Elche, his engineering degree. Then he went to UK. He took a PhD in UK in the University of Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
Then he had a postdoc appointment in King's College and also different visiting appointment in the US. And since it's been how many years you are in?
I've been 5 years in the Bell Labs.
5 years. He's a researcher in Bell Labs and now in Nokia Bell Labs, and he's working on small cells and the evolution of this interesting research field. So today he will speak a little bit about future evolution of cellular networks. And David, thanks a lot for.
Thank you for the invitation.
The call.
All right. So I guess everybody's tired, but we'll try to make it as fun as possible. So this morning we've been talking about dynamic programming and then complex optimization. And I guess they are tools to achieve a target, right? And I guess you guys are interested in the network. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the network, which is the playground where you are going to use all those tools, right? And I just want to give you a perspective of where the network is going in the future. What is the view of Nokia, at least on that? So that when you do your research, at least you apply or try to apply it in a way that it makes sense, so in the directions of the future. For those that doesn't know Bell Labs, we've been a very innovative company. We got 7 Nobel Prizes. We invented the transistor, Unix, the first digital communication, first optical communication, and so on and so forth. We have lately, our main achievement is the late radio cube that I'm going to talk about later, that facilitates the ultra-dense deployment, if you like, but I'll talk about it later. So let's start. So where are we today? So today we have a network that actually mediates between people and digital content. That is what we have today, and is what the current network can handle. Where we want to be in the future, let's say in 2020, we want to have a network that can do the same, but also that is able to communicate the human with the environment, whether natural or built, and also allows the communication between machines and another machines, etc., etc. So what is the issue with this is that this will make traffic to grow exponentially. And this is a bit of a challenge because the current network is not able to support that. There is no way that the current network we have today is able to support that what is coming. So we need a change. So there is the challenge. But in Nokia, for some reason the resolution is not adequate. I don't know if this is going to be the problem, but you cannot see the bottom of the slides. So let's keep on going anyway. So as I was saying, what we saw before is the challenge, right? So a lot of data, new network is needed. I think probably it's too late. We are too tired to try to change it. So let's keep on going.
I think it's not an issue.
Well,
I mean,
let's see.
At this time,
I don't think it is. So let's keep on going and we will see. So basically we have the challenge. We need a new network, right? But we see this as an opportunity because it's also it's really now the opportunity to start doing something new with the network. And our view is that we should aim to have a network that is able of the digitization of everything. So why we want to do that is basically what we are trying to do is to automatize every single feature that can help the human being to save time in things that he doesn't need to spend the time. So basically we want to create a network that is able to make the human communicate with humans, with other machines, the machines in between machines, and the target is to save time for the human being, right? So how we are going to do that? So basically, how are we going to accomplish that? So we need a new network, as I said, and this network is composed of a core that should look like to something very different of what we have today. We will have the clouds. Everybody's talking about clouds. So the idea is that the cloud, we need to put little cloudlets close to the user for doing data caching and stuff like that. So basically the idea is to put the content closer to the user. And then we have the user. But here the peculiarity. The user in the future should be the center of the network. So nowadays we have a network that is network-centric. So the network is what it is, and the user gets what it can get. So, but we want to change that in the future in the sense that we need to create a network that self-organizes itself around the user to provide the user exactly what it needs. The throughput, the latency, the quality of service he needs. So that is the challenge, to create a network that is dynamic enough to self-organize itself around the user. And the user should be the center of everything. And that is not the current paradigm, right? So, and basically, you cannot see it because it's written somewhere there. But one of the main challenge is the short wireless link. So the communication between the cloudlet and the user, or the edge of the network and the user. So to realize this idea, we need a very high performing links here. And as I said before, we don't have that. So the talk about today is about this link here, and how we can achieve this high performance in a cost-efficient manner and energy-efficient manner. So let us talk about that. How can we enable the exponential capacity growth? So let us assume how the topic here today is, for example, how to achieve 1 gigabit per second per user. And for skeptics, because there is a lot of people that says, oh, we don't need 1 gigabit per second per user. Maybe we don't need it today, but we may need it in the future. We don't want to make the same mistake as William Pierce, the chief engineer of the British Post, that he said the Americans have the need of the telephone, but we don't. We have plenty of messenger boys. So, right, that was naive at that time. So let us not be naive now, thinking that we won't need more capacity. Oh.
I can try something.
Right, let's try.
The results.
I guess we need to change the resolution. 16 by 9. Well, let's continue meanwhile.
The guy and then we try
Right,
to
it's fine. So, okay, sorry for the interruption. So, is the summary is that data is growing exponentially. We need to accommodate for that traffic. The network of today is not useful for that. We need to come up with something new, and that something new needs high-performing links at the edge, right? And now we want to talk about how to achieve that. So for those who study wireless networks, basically there is only 3 ways to enhance network capacity. There are only 3 ways to do that. So either we use more spectrum. That means if we make the analogy of the highway, means that we put more lines on the highway, so we can transmit more bits at a time, right? But the problem of this is that it's expensive. The spectrum costs a lot of money. For example, Vodafone paid in the UK for a license of 5 years, 4 billion euros. So this is a way to do it, but it's expensive. Another way to enhance the capacity is through more spatial reuse, using the same analogy of the highways to create more highways. So basically the idea here is to deploy more infrastructure, more and more cells, such that we can reuse the spectrum. So if before we have 20 users in a macro cell, now we densify the network, we have 10 users per macro cell, and we have double the spectrum per user, right? So that is what the spatial reuse means. But the problem of that is that the base stations are expensive as well. So there is a cost there. So we may think which one is more expensive. We'll talk about that later. And the third approach is to enhance the spectral efficiency. That means that how much information you can pack within one line, right? So in a channel, how many bits you can transmit at most. But unfortunately, here we are doing already very well, and we are very close to the Shannon limit. So not many enhancements are expected in this area. So basically, this leaves us two options, right? Or we use more spectrum, or we deploy more infrastructure. As simple as that. Which is the best option? It depends who you are as an operator. Some operators may prefer this one, some other operators. But anyway, let us continue. So we want to think about, okay, how we are going to proceed. So before doing anything, it's always good to understand what has been done in the past. And to that end, Professor William Webb from Ofcom, the UK, put together a very interesting study. So basically, he analyzed where the wireless capacity gains came from 1950 to 2000. And the results are actually quite interesting. So he found out that capacity was improved 10 times by using better PHY techniques, physical layer techniques, all those complex coding, modulation coding schemes, enhancing the capacity by 10 times. By using a wider spectrum, going from the 150 megahertz used in the past to the 3 gigahertz today, 15 times. But by densifying the network, by using smaller and smaller cells, the capacity was increased almost 3,000 times. So now my question to you is, if you want to enhance the capacity by 100 times, by 1,000 times, like Qualcomm is talking about, which one is your bet? Which one you go for? I think it's pretty obvious, right? So if you want to achieve enhance the capacity 1,000 times, it seems that these two guys are not going to make it. They are not even close. So the only solution basically is to densify the network further. And indeed, that is what the industry is doing. So in 2008, the idea of the small cell came about, and everybody since then has been looking at this technology as a way of enhancing capacity. So these are Nokia Alcatel-Lucent products. Now Alcatel belongs to Nokia, so we can say they were Nokia products if you like. So in the past, we used to have the macro cell, this very big gigantic mast of antennas that is at the rooftop of a building. And we have done tremendous efforts in trying to reduce the form factor of the cell. Why? It's just to allow that densification, right? So we cannot densify the network using macro cells. We need to create smaller and smaller cells that have different properties and characteristics. So a lot of effort has been done in the industry to go from the macro to the pico, the femto, the small cell. And recently we came up in 2011 with the light radio cube. So basically the light radio cube is a remote radio head that is no bigger than my fist. So basically it has an integrated antenna, a lot of engineering in this piece. It has a RF component behind, the RF chain, and then the baseband unit integrated all together. So a lot of effort has been done in this area. But basically, why are we doing this? The message here is that we are doing this because we want to densify the network. So the idea of densifying the network is always there. Right? So now let us talk a little bit more about what densifying the network means, right? I'm just giving you the history behind. But let us talk about details now. And to talk about details, and as any other researchers, usually we put together a system model, and then we try to analyze or try to get some understanding of the network based on our system model. In our company, basically, we like to look at different things. So one of the approaches has been through simulation. So, and this is the traditional scenario, right? So you model antenna gain, path gain, environment gain, shadow fading, multipath, and then you achieve a total gain map. And that allows you to have an understanding. So we deploy base stations, users, and you perform different analyses, right? We could study different densification levels and so on and so forth. Any other method could be to use a more theoretical approach to this instead of using simulation, because some people may think it's expensive or they don't give you the insights, the probability that the SNI is larger than a threshold, and that allows you to have some intuition. Then with that, we can compute the area spectral efficiency. That means the number of bits that can be transmitted per hertz in a kilometer per unit of area, and this kind of thing. So I don't want to go in the details, but what I want to highlight here is that you as a researchers when you go to do your research and to prove your ideas, you may have different approaches to do it, right? You can go through simulation. Simulation allows you to study a more detailed scenario, right? But it might be more time consuming, and it might be even more complicated to develop the simulator. For some people that doesn't want to go through this and want to go more theoretical, it has the mathematics. There are mathematical tools that can help you to get some insight on the network. I just want to open up that discussion because I think it's important now that you are starting your PhD, just to know that there is not only theoretical tools and there is not only simulation tools. Right? So let us talk about densification now. Since 2008, a lot of work has been done in small cells. I don't know if you are familiar with the small cell concept, but a lot of work has been done in industry, and a lot of work has been done in academia. And actually, some very nice theoretical results has been achieved. And here we have one of the most important, I would say. And they have very interesting conclusions that they were very useful at the time. The user signal quality is independent of the base station density. So this means that it doesn't matter that we deploy more cells, the signal quality is not going to change. The intuition is that when we deploy more cells, we grow the interference is stronger, but the user is also closer to the small cell. So one compensates the other, and the signal quality is the same. And that is very good for the operator, right? Because it says you can deploy more and more cells, you benefit from the spatial reuse because you have more bandwidth per user, but the quality is the same, so everything is fantastic. So this is like saying, green light, go ahead, deploy as much as you want. And other results follow, like probability of coverage is independent of the base station density. So this follows from here. So the probability of coverage, the probability that you have coverage is independent of the number of base stations that you deploy. How handy is that? So cool, right? Let's deploy more and more cells to have more and more spatial reuse. And basically, this network capacity is linear with the base station density, right? This is the key message for an operator. Deploy cells because you're going to grow the capacity linearly. So we reuse more of the spectrum. And here's the danger of not analyzing things carefully. All these things are true, actually are very true, and the results that the authors provide are consistent. But they are consistent within a given range of the densification, within a given range of base station density per unit of area. The mistake usually is from the reader or from other researchers that extrapolate the message from these works to denser networks. And unfortunately, that cannot be done because an ultra-dense network doesn't behave like a sparse small cell network. And that is what I want to talk about today. So why the ultra-dense network is different from the sparse one is because the interference is stronger, and I'll talk about that later. Because the signal carrier is bounded, because there are more base stations than active users, and that has some implications, and there are less active users per base station, as well as the traffic is vaster. So these are the 5 main differences that we have identified in our research in Nokia Bell Labs that makes ultra-dense small cell networks different than the network we have today. And the message is that operators should be aware of this, and otherwise they may be making a mistake when spending the money to deploy more and more infrastructure. So because they may find themselves paying exponentially more money for a diminishing gain. So how bad is that, right? So let me talk to you a little bit more about these 5 different aspects that I think are very important for ultra-dense networks. And I think it's very important to this energy saving that you want to achieve in your project. I just put things here very simply so that everybody can understand, but I think it's enough. So, first difference, the interference is stronger. What do I mean by that? So let us look at these 2 examples. This is the traditional macrocell network, which is sparse. So we have 2 macrocells, 500 meters distance between them. The user is at 70 meters from the server. So there is a high probability that the user is line of sight and the interference is not line of sight. Traditional X scenario. Probability of line of sight, non-line of sight is the probability that you directly see the base station, that there is no object in between, right? So now we go and densify the network a little bit. Where we have 500 meters, now we have 250 meters, and the user now is 35 meters away instead of 70 from the server. But the distances are quite big. Still, 250 meters is very likely that the interference link is non-line of sight, that there is a building or something in between. And this serving link is still line of sight. Nothing changed. Fine, signal quality should remain the same. But now let us look when we look at very dense networks. So now the small cells small cells are 40 meters apart between each other. The user is around 6 meters away from the server. So, and we have this case, line of sight, no line of sight, like above. But now we go and we densify the network. And here is the important bit. So the interferer that before was no line of sight, now it becomes line of sight. So here we densify the network, and here it was no line of sight, continues to be no line of sight because the distance is large. But now we go and densify the network from 40 to 20 meters, and there is a phenomenon that should be considered, is that the interference begins to be line of sight as well. So basically the interferer is killing you because it's seeing you directly. And now we find that the interference is growing faster than the carrier signal. So this is given here in this plot. Basically, I'm plotting the CDF of the SNA of the user. So, and this is the densification level, right? So we densify like that. So here we see that when the intersize distance between base stations is around 200 meters, and if we go to 150 meters, nothing really changes, right? They overlap on top of each other. And this is what Jeff Andrews and his crew show, right? The probability of coverage doesn't change. They are correct. But let us look when we continue densifying the network. At some point, the signal quality takes a hit. So, and there is a degradation, right? The signal quality is worsening. So that means that maybe my operator is deploying more and more cells. I'm making the signal quality worse and worse. And where before I could call, now I can't. How bad is that? Because you as a customer, probably I need to increase your bill to pay for the densification because the base station costs money. And then I'm telling you, but don't worry, you need to pay more because you are going to have more capacity. But then I densify the network, you take your phone, and where before you could call, now I can't. How bad is that? I go and I change operator. So it's a very important phenomenon to consider, right? These results were obtained through simulation. Then we went through the pain to do the theory here with the stochastic geometry. You can find the details in the paper. But basically, I summarize for you the results. So here we have the probability of coverage. And here we have the aerial spectral efficiency, the number of bits per hertz per unit of area. And we compare the single path loss model that was used in previous studies, that they are not able to differentiate between line of sight and non-line of sight. So basically, we see what I said before. When I densify the network, the coverage grows, and at some point becomes stable. The probability of coverage doesn't decrease because the signal quality doesn't decrease. But now, when we go to a more realistic model with the probability of line of sight and non-line of sight, we see that the probability of coverage grows, but at some point decreases. So this area is the bad one. Here is where the interference starts to transition between non-line of sight to line of sight. And the result of this is that where before the prediction was that the capacity will grow linearly, now actually we need to take a hit here, and then the capacity increases at a lower pace. Just something to think about. It's just to let you know this will happen when you densify the network. Another interesting fact, the second one that I was talking about before, the signal carrier, the power of the signal is bounded. What do I mean by that? Plenty of studies in the past has been done in the 2D domain, in the single plane. The height wasn't considered. And a lot of papers has been written about thousands, about networks in the 2D domain. And again, that's fine. That's fine when we are looking at a macro or a sparse network. But when we look at ultra-dense network, it's not fine anymore. And that is something that people didn't really get yet, right? So why is that? More or less the same graphs as before here, but here we consider the height, right? So we have a macro. The macro cell is at a higher height than the small cell. Just to make the long story short, the idea is that when you are approaching, when you densify and you are approaching, the user cannot really get closer to the server because of the height of the antenna. If here the height of the antenna is 9.5 meters, the guy will never get closer, more closer than 8.5 meters to the base station, to the server, right? Because there is a height that cannot be overpassed unless the guy goes up on the antenna, right? So basically, when you densify, at some point the carrier signal, your signal, stops growing in power, because the idea is that as I densify, the network gets closer to me and I receive more power. But at some point, you are on top of the base station and you cannot overcome that distance. But that is not true for the interferer. The interferer continues to approach you. Many interferers come to interfere you closer and closer. So the carrier signal stops growing, but the interference continues growing. So that has an impact as well on the SNR quality. So the height of the antenna is really important. Here we can see that this is the same curves as before. So, and we can see that the blue curve, we consider that there is a height of 8.5 in the small cells, right? And in the red one, we consider that the antenna is at the same height as the user, always. So we see that because of this thing I'm talking about, the carrier signal is bounded, the SNR becomes worse, the probability of coverage decreases faster. So ideally, what is the message here? Is that in the future, we want to deploy small cells at the height of the human. The more you densify, the closer the small cell needs to come to you. Right? But this is a problem, because if the cells are at the reach of the human, that may create some issues when you deploy. They might be tampered, they might be stolen, so that requires a different type of base station probably. Something to think about as well. But the height is important and should be not neglected. Now I've been talking all the time about bad news. Now let us talk about the good news, because there is also benefits on densifying. Not everything is bad, so let us talk about it. So there is another phenomena, that there is more base stations than users in an ultra-dense network. There is more infrastructure than users themselves. And that is something that we can take advantage of. How? Through this idea of the idle mode. And this is very important for energy efficiency too. Idle mode means that cells with no users should be switched off. So basically, if there is a cell that has no user, instead of continuing transmitting the broadcast signal and all the signaling, that cell instead should be switched off. And if we are able to do that, these results show that here I'm plotting basically the CDF of the SNR with the densification, as I did before here. So you remember here the when I densify the network, the SNR was getting worse because of the non-line of sight to line of sight transition of the interferer. But now, if I'm able to switch off the cells that have no user, actually the trend is inverted. Now the densification helped me to increase the SNR. That makes sense, right? So if we densify the network, I get closer to my cell, but there is also, the more I densify, the more chances that there are cells with no user that can be switched off. So the more I densify, the more cells I can switch off. So here you have a plot showing that. So here we have a dense network in which all the cells are on, and the users are here in the hotspot, the squares. So basically, when I implement the idle mode, I allow the network the capability of following that the network, the base station distribution follows the user distribution. And only the cells that has a user are switched on. So you create these areas where there are no base stations on, and then they don't contribute to the interference. So that allows me to fix the problem of the transition that I showed before. And I'll talk about later more about the idle mode, how to realize it in a real cell. And this is also done with theory. We analyzed this problem with stochastic geometry. Again, it was a little bit painful, the mathematics, but we managed to get the expressions we wanted. So this is the curve that we had before, the probability of coverage that decreases. But now we can see that when we allow the idle mode, we allow to switch off the cells that are with no user, then the probability of coverage decreases a little bit because of the transition of the interference from no line of sight to line of sight, but at some point takes off. It grows. And this makes the aerial spectral efficiency, the capacity of the network, grow faster than before. Right? So basically, so far we've talked about the damage of the transition of the interference from no line of sight to line of sight and the damage of the height. To fix the damage of the height, we bring down the base stations to the user's height, and to fix the problem of the non-line of sight transition, we implement the idle mode. So we are kind of okay now. We have problems, but we found the solutions we wanted. Another interesting bit. So now when we densify the network a lot, there is much more less users per base station, which is the implication of that. So the more cells I have, the less users per cell, and the larger the probability of line of sight. Which is the implication of that is that I lose in the multi-user diversity, and there is less channel fluctuations. What does this mean? So basically, let us imagine that there is a cell there, and we are all connected to it. So basically, let's say we have independent fading. So somebody will have constructive fading, and somebody will have destructive fading. So in today's schedulers, in the macro cells, we have proportional fair, meaning that at a specific point in time, I go and I select those users that have a good fade. And basically, that enhances the throughput of the network because I have a pool of users that I can pick. But now when I densify the network a lot, you guys are not here anymore, and maybe it's only the three of us that are connected to this small cell that is here. So the ability of the cell to choose users has vanished, and the gain because of that disappears. Right? And so that's fine, because that gain is around 20%. I'm happy to sacrifice the gain of the proportional fair scheduler because I have much more spatial reuse. I'm enhancing the bandwidth per user. But this has an implication in the cell. So does it really make sense to implement proportional fair? Or should we go for a round-robin type of scheduler? If there is less users and less fluctuations, I can save some cycles in the FPGA of the small cell that this complexity has, right? And this is what this figure comes to show us. Basically, when we have a 200-meter synthesized distance between the cells, the gain of proportional fair over round-robin is around 20%. But when we densify the network to 20-meter synthesized distance, the gain has been reduced to 8%. So it might be that I can simplify my network, my base station, and instead of doing proportional fair, I can just do round-robin. So this is just an example. Maybe you guys can think about other things that can be brought into the small cell, or some simplifications that could be brought in a similar manner, right? So this is just to provide an example that is the simplification of the base station is allowed to make it cheaper. And this is my favorite. So I think when people talk about the small cells, it's the myth, like, okay, fine, this is the tool. We are going to densify like crazy, and we are going to get the throughput that we like. No problem. The more money I spend, if I have the idle mode, capacity grows linearly. Let's continue. But that is a misunderstanding, because there is a limit, right? And the limit is when I have one user per cell, I'm done. there is no more spatial reuse. If we have 2 users in a cell and we have 20 megahertz bandwidth, so we have 10 each, right? But if I go and I densify, now we have only 1 user per cell, I double the bandwidth per head. 1 user can enjoy the 20 megahertz. But if I continue densifying, that user is a user, cannot be split. The bandwidth per head doesn't continue growing. So the question is that the sweet spot of the densification? Let us stop when we have 1 user per cell in average. Might be. Here we have a curve that tries to answer that question. So basically, we show the level of densification, and here we show the average user throughput. And it's interesting to see that when the density grows from 200 meter synthesized distance to 35 meter synthesized distance, the capacity grows very fast. Very cool, right? So we densify, we get these linear gains of the spectrum. But at some point, the gains start capping. The gains become logarithmic. Here we have linear gains. Now the gains are logarithmic. It's obvious, right? There is at this level, we achieve the 1 user per cell, and there is only gains because the user is approaching the base station, so the SNR goes higher. But if you look at I'm going to write only one formula, not like my friend before. But if you look at this important formula, right, the Shannon formula, by densifying this is the capacity, if you want, capacity in BPS, bits per second. So this formula is telling me that if I densify the network, I have more bandwidth per head, right? Here we can have divided by the number of users, if it could be a round-robin scheduler. So the more cells, the capacity grows linearly because I have more bandwidth per user. But then the gains of putting the user closer to the base station are okay. I will enhance the SNR, but unfortunately this gain is logarithmic. So the objective should be always putting more bandwidth per head. It's okay to maximize SNR. A lot of effort has been done in that. Coordinated scheduling. But the gains are never great. The gains will never give you 3-4 times the capacity. If we are looking for a 10 times, 100 times performance increase, there is very little thing to do there. And this is what we are showing here. So here we reach 1 user per cell, and the gains per user are logarithmic, so they are capping. And this is okay, but even worse, there is a thing that is even worse that worries me, is that the maximum performance we can achieve is 720 megabps. That is so bad, because for 5G we are promising to achieve 1 gigabit per second per user. And now I come here and I tell you, if I densify the network up to half, 1 cell every 5 meters, the maximum performance I'm going to get is this one. And it's so bad that it's not even the promise that we made for the 5G. So terrible. So what can we do about that, right? Something we need to do to deliver on our promise. I will talk about it later. It's just here to show you as well the theoretical analysis that we did before on the proportional, on this proportional fair versus round robin comparison. So here we have the same curve as we had before when we have the idle mode deployed. And here we have the same but with the proportional fair scheduler. So this is round robin, proportional fair. So we see that when we have the density of base stations is not so large, we enjoy the multi-user diversity and there are some gains. But when we come to a very dense network, the gain of proportional fair over round robin is minimum, and at some point is none. So it's just to make the same point as before. Basically, I'm showing you everything we did through simulation. We were able to do it theoretically. That is the only message. For us, simulation was much faster because we have simulators, this and that. But if you want to prove something, you must do it theoretically too, right? And that is the approach of the academia. So we went through the pain. So when I did these slides, I just wanted to give you the flavor that neither simulation is wrong or bad, or theoretical analysis is better or bad either. So they complement each other. So I don't like people that get dragged into the situation, oh, I'm an academic, I must do theory. Let's not do the other thing. For us, the approach we always take is to simulate first. We see the intuition quickly, this happens, this doesn't happen, and then we go and prove. But we never discard any. All right, so I'm going to avoid this one for the sake of time. And I'm going to continue with the argument of I'm not delivering on my promise. I'm not achieving the 1 gigabit per second per user that I wanted. How do I get there? So if you remember, we were talking about this triangle of truth at the beginning that shows more bandwidth, more cells, more spectral efficiency. So now we need to go, and we are forced to explore the more bandwidth dimension. So because it's the only way that we can deliver on our promise. So, okay, let's go down that path. We don't have others. Okay, I want to use more bandwidth. The only solution is to use a higher carrier. So now today we are around 2 gigahertz for the LTE. So we need to go higher, 3.5, 5. Some people is talking about 60, right? The higher you are, the more bandwidth you have, which is what we want. We make the motorway wider with more lanes. But like everything in life, there is a price to pay for that more bandwidth. And the price is that higher carrier frequency has a higher path loss. Basically, the range is reduced, which means that I need to deploy more infrastructure. And there is more channels to power. So there are more subcarriers to light up. So I need more power in that sense. So I'm not going to talk much about the capacity improvement because basically, as this formula has shown, if I have more bandwidth, I should expect a linear increase in the capacity. So if I wanna achieve double the performance that I was achieving here, I just need to double the bandwidth. Here was 1 megahertz, 100 megahertz channel. I just need to double it, and I will be in the promise I want it to be. So that's why we are not so worried about that. But an interesting thing is the power that the small cell needs to consume. So here I'm plotting the densification level, and here the power of the small cell. So if we look at the 200 synthesize, if we look for a 2 gigahertz frequency with a 100 megahertz channel, here is around 43 dBm for 200 meter synthesized distance. That is today's macrocell level. But if I want to use 500 megahertz, that is the 10 gigahertz carrier, I would need to have 70 dBm power in the macrocell. So if I want to use 500 megahertz in a macrocell today, I would need 70 dBm. And that is crazy. That is insane. We cannot do that. Impossible. So basically, this comes to tell us that if we want to use more bandwidth, we need to use smaller and smaller cells. We cannot reach that far. If I want to use a lot of bandwidth in a macrocell to reach very far, I would need a lot of power because I need to overpass a higher path loss and to light up more carriers. So the usage of more bandwidth forced me to use small cells. It's not a choice anymore. But anyway, it's what we wanted before, right? It's where the industry is going anyway. No problem. But the question is, where do we get the more bandwidth? As I said before, Vodafone paid in 2008, I believe, £4 billion for 20 megahertz channel. And now we are talking about 500. I don't think Vodafone or any other operator is now in the position to pay that money. And they are not actually. So different solutions need to be looked at. And actually, we've been quite successful in Nokia Bell Labs with this new idea that we had in my department, the idea of boost. So let me give you the intuition here of what we did. So we were looking for this 500 megahertz bandwidth. And if you are working in this industry, 500 megahertz sounds like Wi-Fi, like unlicensed spectrum. So we started to explore that dimension because those are for free, right? It's unlicensed spectrum. It was ticking the box. And then we took some time to think, okay, how can we use this bandwidth in the most efficient manner that we can? And then we put this simple diagram. And we thought, oh, let us look at Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is everywhere. And actually, it's very good in downlink. It performs really well in downlink because it has plenty of bandwidth. That is what we are looking for. But it's not performing so well in uplink because of the CSMA CA access. You have plenty of users, collision happen, contention, collision, and we are all familiar with the problems in conference venues, this and that. So very efficient in downlink, not so efficient in uplink because it wasn't designed for that. It was the first at least releases were designed for indoor, for home usage, if you like. And then if we go and look at the LTE happens to be just the opposite. It's very inefficient in downlink because the bandwidth is small, and this is why we came here today in this presentation, because we are looking for more bandwidth. But actually it's quite good in uplink because it has a scheduler. It has the brain that Wi-Fi doesn't have to schedule users, to say you. There is no need for contention. So we thought, is not this a perfect marriage? Like, why don't we create a network in which we do only Wi-Fi in downlink? We use Wi-Fi only for the downlink, and we use LTE only for the uplink. How about that? We thought. And then we went ahead with our tools. Again, we did simulations, we did theoretical analysis. And this is what we found, is that in most of X scenarios, enterprise X scenarios, basically the ones we are targeting, we can see that if we use this approach, capacity can increase up to almost 4 times, and the delay of the voice over IP traffic decreases almost by 80%. Right? And you may ask why? It's just what I said. So imagine we have only a Wi-Fi IP here, and we are all contending for the channel. So there will be contention and probably collisions that makes retransmission happens, the mistrail goes down in the retrade chain, Wi-Fi starts underperforming. So when we put all the uplink traffic into LTE, that doesn't happen anymore, and the unlicensed spectrum is just used in downlink, scheduled by the access point, no problem at all. So by doing that, you enhance a lot the capacity of the network. This idea was presented last year in the Mobile World Congress, and now actually has been already standardized within the 3GPP under the name of LWIP. So I think it's one of our successful stories in Dublin. The uplink here is 2 gigahertz. It's licensed. So we put all the uplink traffic in the licensed spectrum, so it won't interfere the downlink in unlicensed. So basically, we remove the contentions. Now, in this LWIP framework, we've been more sophisticated, so we have a flow control algorithm that is able to shift traffic in downlink between Wi-Fi and LTE. And in the release 14 of the standard, there will be the same feature for the uplink. There is a flow control method that is able to put traffic on one or the other. This is just an extreme case of that framework that is being now currently standardized. Right? So, good. We had a problem. We densified the network. We didn't have the throughput we wanted. We looked for more bandwidth. We knew that more bandwidth would give us the promise we wanted to reach. We looked for the bandwidth. We found it in the unlicensed band, and we come up with a technology to exploit it in an efficient manner, right? But we also thought, okay, we know there is another dimension. Let us look at it. It's the one of using more antennas, the more spectral efficiency. So we were curious about it, and we thought, let us explore that as well. So if you have worked with multi-antenna base stations, basically you have two choices. When you have a base station with multiple antennas, you have two choices. You may do beamforming, or you may do spatial multiplexing. Beamforming means that if you have, let's say, 4 antennas, I use the 4 antennas to transmit the data stream, but I focalize the energy towards the user I want. So I can send it to you, so the SNR grows, right? The other approach is I can be a bit more ambitious, and if I have 4 antennas, I can think to transmit 4 data streams at a time. I cannot beamform the coverage, so it could be omnidirectional. The SNR could be smaller, but the bandwidth is 4 times, right? Because I'm reusing it. Those are the two choices I've got. But let us look at this. So now we are talking about densifying the network, more cells, and we all know that that has an impact. So the more the cells, the smaller the interface distance, and the larger the probability of line of sight. And if the probability of line of sight is larger, the chances that the channel is highly correlated is larger. And this spatial multiplexing doesn't like that. Spatial multiplexing doesn't like correlated channels. So that is a problem. And also, usually the more the cells, the smaller the cell that the base station group we create, and the distance between the antennas become closer to each other as well. That may pose some problems. So basically, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that if you densify the network a lot, spatial multiplexing gains may vanish. And this is something that we need to think about carefully, because let's say we have 4 antennas here. So if the network wouldn't be so dense that I stopped the densification earlier, probably I will have a more uncorrelated channel, and I can use my 4 antennas to transmit 4 data streams. So it might be that densifying too much may give me more spatial reuse, but may kill my spatial multiplexing. So there are some thinking to do here, because it's easier to deploy more antennas in the base station up to some point than densifying the network itself. So it's cheaper to deploy more antennas per base station than densifying the network itself. So this is something that we all need to think about. But we didn't go that direction yet. We are looking at that at the moment. But what we did is to study the beamforming bit. So the assumption was that, okay, spatial multiplexing doesn't really make sense for ultra-dense networks, and we should use beamforming. And then we went ahead and looked at the 1, 2, or 4 antennas per base station, the maximum ratio beamforming, and the LTE codebook. And then we performed our studies as before. We had the densification level, and we have the throughput per user. And here, basically, we have 3 curves. It's 1 antenna, 2 antennas, 4 antennas, and this is for the 500 megahertz bandwidth, and this is for the 100 megahertz bandwidth. So here we have a linear increase of performance because of the bandwidth, and here let's pay attention to the antenna number. So basically we see that enhancing the number of antennas from 1 to 2, it gives you a performance improvement because you're enhancing the SNR by the beamforming gain, right? And pointing the beam to the user. But we can see that when we go from 2 to 4, basically the gain is around the same as before, but I have put 4 and I have doubled the number of antennas, right? Here I go from 1 to 2, and here I go from 2 to 4. I have to deploy double the antennas to get the same gain. And this is in accordance with the linear array gain theory that says that the gain with the number of antennas is logarithmic. So if you have a linear array, the gain of the array is logarithmic with the number of antennas, and this is what is shown here. The simulation results confirm that. So basically, it comes to tell me that if I'm using beamforming, I don't really need to get 1,000 antennas per cell because the gain is logarithmic. A different thing is if we are doing pre-coding these new massive MIMOs that they have a combination of spatial multiplexing and beamforming. But if we are using only beamforming, the gain of the linear array is logarithmic with the number of antennas. And the good news is that if we put all these things together, 500 megahertz channel, 4 antennas, and a very high densification level, we can get up to 4 gigabps per user, meaning that we are able to deliver in our promise of the 5G, right? So I guess the intention was to walk you through a little bit about the process of how we densify the network, how we get more capacity in the network in the future. Densification seems to be the way we are doing it now. The new standard, the 5G, is going to go a lot into using higher frequency bands. And then there is a lot of things that need to be looked at for the multi-antenna techniques, like massive MIMO and all these things that we need to understand the densification level with the number of antennas. How are we doing with the time? Fine. Okay, so. Okay, and I wanted to add this because I think it's the topic of the school. So let us talk about it, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, I have the feeling that at the beginning, when I started to work for Vodafone more than 10 years ago, it was like the salt of the dish, right? Something nice to have, but that you can live without. Not really something that we really care about 10 years ago. But now we have come to the point that we need to care. Why? Because if we densify the network a lot, we are going to deploy many, many more cells. And that will have a tremendous impact on the bill of the operators, apart from the greenness and the environment. So it's now that when we deploy many, many, many cells that will consume more, more, and more, we may have a problem. So that's why we care about this more than ever. And here, before doing anything, as I said before, we like to do theoretical an study. Before anything, we should do a study to have some kind of understanding. So we went to look at the energy efficiency. And then we made some assumptions. So we went there is this Green Touch project. That was the leading project on energy efficiency in the past. It was led by Alcatel-Lucent. I hope you guys do even better than this one. And they come up with some models for the base station consumption. And they call it a slow idle mode, shutdown idle mode. They have different properties. I don't want to go into that, but it just gives you the power consumption. In the slow idle mode means that the cell goes off. As I said before, ideally, if a user has no user, if a cell has no user, we want that the base station goes off. But the truth is that today it doesn't go off because you switched off part of the circuitry, but not the entire cell, because then how you wake it up? There should be some things going on still. But they devised different idle modes with different degree of sleep. Like shutdown consumes less than idle mode, let's say. Anyway, we took the model, and then we created our own models, very easy. I assume, okay, this mode 3 consumes 15% of this one. And this sleep mode 4 consumes 0% of that one. We just made it up for the sake of comparison. And then we plot the energy efficiency. Densification, energy efficiency. Energy efficiency means, in this case, BPS, bits per second, divided by energy, right? Volt. So here we plot the different sleep modes. Basically, this consumes something, even if the cell has no user, and the number 4 consumes nothing. This is the dream to get here. It's just for the sake of completeness. So we can see, let us look at what happens when we have 4 antennas. So the energy efficiency grows with the densification, and then it goes down. So when I densify the network, as I showed before in the previous graph, the capacity was growing very quickly, right? Because of the more spatial reused. I quickly get more bandwidth per user. So the numerator grows very fast at the beginning with the densification. That's why the energy efficiency grows. But at some point, when I achieve 1 user per user, for example, one user per cell, when I achieve 1 user per cell, then the capacity doesn't grow as fast because of the logarithmic cap, right? So, but the power consumption, I'm deploying more and more cells, many, many of them. So even here is 2,000 per square kilometer. So probably I reached 1 user per cell here, which capped my throughput, but then I continue densifying the network. And even if those cells, they don't have a user, they consume a little. But this is still enough to bring down the energy efficiency. And we see that this trend happens always But when I assume a sleep mode 4, that means that the idle base stations don't consume anything. In that case, the energy efficiency grows, right? Because adding more cells comes at no penalty. So this is just to give you an idea that if we want to be energy efficient, we need to switch off the cells that are not being used, and we really need to switch them off. So the problem is, how do we wake them up? Because if they are on, they could be sniffing, listening around, and then if I listen to somebody, I wake up, easy. But if I do that, I may not be the energy efficient I want to be. Here our idea, we have a very simple idea. We really like simple solutions. So how about, I'm saying to you now that the issue is in the cells that has no user. So I need to make the consumption of those 0. So the idea is, what about I harvest the energy? I use the energy from energy harvesting only for the case when the cell is off. When the base station has no user, instead of switching off, it reduces the capability. It shut down some circuitry, but not all. But the one that remains on is using energy harvesting. So that energy comes for free, and then your energy efficiency goes up. This is just an idea if you just care about being energy efficient by definition. So here we follow the Green Touch model. It's quite complete. Well, basically they provide a MATLAB program that you put few inputs, like quite a few of them actually, and then it comes back to you with the power consumption of the cell. It's free available, so you can go online and check it out.
Same process is solar energy, or
here harvesting, we say whatever. I mean, this is just an idea. I'm going to talk about now some implementations, but the key concept is that if I'm able to harvest 0.5 volts, that was the energy estimated for having this cell in idle mode here, in shutdown mode here, then I can claim that that cell consumes nothing from the grid. And then I can claim that this purple line will be true. And then I can go out there and say, yeah, I'm energy efficient. I don't know even if it's true or not. But let us look at how we did that. And I just put here this for the fun. So basically, global warming is an issue. You can see how this, basically, it's true that we have a problem with energy efficiency. We also have, it's true that we made numbers, and if we deploy the number of small cells we want to deploy in the UK, for example, we will need half of a nuclear reactor to maintain all the small cells, right? So it's a problem. This just comes to reinforce what I said before. So what we did was something very stupid as first step to implement it in our products. And we thought, okay, let's do something. So this is our femtocell. So we are going to do something. When there is no user, we are going to switch it off. Boom. No consumption, or very little consumption. But now we are going to attach a very low power sniffer to it that only sniffs for power. So can we do something with that? And the answer is yes, we can. Because this user, for example, that is now entering the home where the cell is off, and let's say it tries to make a call, it's going to start making a call, and the small cell is off, right? But they will still try to connect to the macro. That is always on. So here starts a communication with the macro cell, and the little sniffer that we put in the femto will pick that up, that signal, and they will say, oh, there is, my owner is here, my user is here, I'm going to wake up. So that is the way that we designed that. And we did, there is one slide missing. Well, basically, there is a slide missing, I don't know why. But basically we tested this. Basically, we took our femto, we opened it up, we developed the sensor, the sniffer, and then we went to the houses of a few colleagues and tried to check that up if the sensor was able to pick up the call to the macro cell and react to that. And the answer is yes, it was able to do it. But this is just an example. This is an idea that simple things works. This has many drawbacks. For example, if there is no macro, it doesn't work, right? So you guys, you need to think something better than this. This is the easiest way to do things, right? We proved that this works and it has some gains, but it doesn't work everywhere. I give you another example. Let us imagine that this guy, maybe he is rich or whatever, and he has deployed 3 small cells within his house. So he comes home to make the call, and it could be nice that only 1 cell will wake up to his call. But with this naive approach, the 3 of them will wake up. So that doesn't make sense, right? So it could be nice to have a method that selects the cell that is going to wake up. But the drawback of that is that you need a macro cell assisted or an assisted process by somebody else to say you wake up. So something to think about. All right. And if you allow me 15 minutes more, I can tell you the most exciting thing we are doing at the moment. And with that, I will finish. If it's here, yeah. Okay. Oh, full screen F5. Oh. Okay, and I put just this together because it's also energy efficient related. So just to make the summary of what I said before. So capacity is increasing because now everybody wants to communicate with everybody, even machines want to communicate with the machines in the future, blah, blah, blah. We need more capacity and we need a new network for that. We've gone through this triangle, right? We showed that with densification we can do gain some capacity. Then by using a wider spectrum, we can get some more. And then by using more antennas in the small cell, we can even get farther. So we went through the 3 ways of enhancing capacity. But now we become to the problem of being efficient, right? And we have really a big problem here with the small cells, and it's the power and the backhaul. In 2008, when we started with the small cell, we thought that there are predictions that we are going to sell millions and millions of small cells. I think at that time they predicted 50 million, even for the UK. No, sorry, for worldwide in that year. We didn't even get close to that. Why? It's because of this, power and backhaul. The idea is nice, but it has to be plugged in and has to be backhauled. There needs to be a fiber or DSL. And that is easy when you give the cell for indoor usage to a customer like you guys, that you have that at home, you have electricity and backhaul. But when you want to deploy outdoors, where the operator needs to deploy, he has to pay somebody else for that. And actually, it's usually quite a bit of money. So this prevented the small cell market to take off in the past, because we have a power and backhaul problem. So it's not just that we want to be green. It's that this is really an issue. What we want is to deploy it everywhere, whenever we like, and pay the minimum cost for that. Of course, we want to be green, but we need to enable everything. So let us not try to solve the power thing like just being green. It's that if the socket is there, but it might be that it's more convenient to deploy the small cell there because the canteen is there and everybody's going to be there. So why should I deploy the small cell here even if the plug is here? You know what I mean? So having this flexibility of deployment, it can really allow me to deploy within the hotspot. And that is what I want to do as an operator. Here, what I was talking about before, I don't think you can see it very well, but this is the cost of operation of a network. And you can see that actually backhaul and power accounts for most of the cost for the operator. So it's really a problem, because if I want to deploy a small cell in a place that there is no backhaul, I need to dig a trench if I want to have fiber, right? And digging a trench is expensive. So it really costs a lot of money to the operator. And this is something that we know and that we are trying to solve.